In this lesson, we're going to take a look at bivariate categorical data, and we're going to analyze it using a two-way table. A two-way frequency table. This simply displays counts of two categorical variables. The categories are labeled at the top and at the left side of the table. Then the frequency or the count appears in the 4 cells. Now, sometimes we could have 3 categories going across the top or down the left side. So we are looking here and we are seeing if there is an association between folks that take gifted classes and extracurriculars. So let's take a look at the 3 totals that we have in this frequency table. We have the total of the columns, 38 and 22. We have the total of the rows, 40 and 20. And then we have the total people that were surveyed, which is 60. So the bottom right total is the total of the whole survey. And again, these are our original survey results. We had 30 folks taking gifted that have extracurriculars. We have 8 folks that are in gifted but do not participate in extracurriculars. We have 10 folks that are in on level and participate in extracurriculars, and 12 that are in on level and do not participate in extracurriculars. Okay, now let's take a look at some vocabulary. You definitely want to jot this down in your notes because sometimes these new vocabulary words are used to ask the question. And with statistics, it's the way in which the questions are worded that you have to be very careful in how to answer, especially because we have 3 types of totals. So joint frequency is just that initial count, and we call it joint because it's the joining of the 2 categories. So we are joining the columns with the rows. So this is the joint frequency, where the columns and the rows join together. Then we have marginal frequency. These are the totals along the margin, just like on notebook paper where you have margins on the sides. So the margin totals are the totals of the columns and the totals of the rows. Those are marginal frequencies. Now notice 60 is not part of marginal frequencies. So if you were asked to identify the marginal frequencies, you would simply identify 40, 20, 38, and 22, and not 60. So we're going to ask, is there an association with being in gifted classes and taking extracurriculars? Could I make a prediction of someone who's in a gifted class and predict if they would be participating in extracurriculars or not? However, if we just look at the count, we may not get an actual good evaluation. So what we're going to have to do is look at the percentages to get a better idea to see if there is an association. So a two-way relative frequency table simply means percent. So when you see the word relative, you just need to think percentage and take the percent of the number. Now let's just recall how to take a percent of a number. So you're going to take the part and divide it by your total. And again, we have many different totals in our two-way tables. And then you're going to multiply it by 100 to get your percent. So make sure you write this formula in your notebook. So there are 3 ways to show relative frequency because we have 3 types of totals. We have the total of people that were surveyed, we have the total of the rows, and we have the total of the columns. So we have 3 different types of relative frequency table. So let's take a look at a relative frequency for a whole table. That just means each entry is divided by your total surveyed. So we simply will take 30, divide it by 60, and then multiply it by 100. And we'll do that for each of these cells. And of course, we can just use our calculator to get our answer. So I'm going to just take my calculator and we're just going to divide those out. And this is called, again, relative frequency for whole table. Now, if we just use the word relative frequency and we don't use the word whole table, we just are going to assume that it is the whole table. So divide every count by your total that was surveyed and multiply it by 100. And of course, since we use this total, this will be 100%. And when we divide those out, this is what we should get. Now, when we get a decimal, let's round to the nearest tenth of our percent here. So we can see that out of all those surveyed, 50%, so half of the people we surveyed, are in gifted and participate in extracurriculars. We can see that 20% of all those we surveyed are in on level and are not in extracurriculars. So this gives a percent based on the total surveyed. However, sometimes the relative frequency for a whole table is still a bit misleading. So instead of using the total survey to answer our question, if there is a correlation between being in a gifted class or not and having extracurricular activities, we can base our answer on a conditional relative frequency where we take a look at the row total or the column total. So a conditional relative frequency by row. That means we're only going to look at the rows. In this case, we're going to look at extracurriculars and no extracurriculars. And we're going to be dividing by these totals. So we will not need this row at all. So we will simply divide 30 divided by 40 times 100. And we'll do that for each of these. And of course, this will be 100%. And in this row, we will be dividing by the 20. And of course, here we'll have 100%. So this is going to be basically looking, if you are in extracurriculars, are you more, less, or equally likely to be in a gifted class as if you don't take extracurriculars? Is there a correlation, or I should say an association, of those who participate in extracurriculars and being in a gifted class or on level? Here is the results. This is conditional relative frequency for rows. So you would use this table, for example, if you were asked, of those who are participating in extracurriculars, what percent are in gifted classes? Or you may be asked, of those not in extracurriculars, what percent are in gifted classes? So it's all based on how the question is being asked. Now let's take a look at conditional relative frequency by column. So this time I'm looking at, if you're in a gifted class, are you more, less, or equally likely to be in extracurriculars as on-level people? So this time we are going to be dividing by the total of the column. So it will be 30 out of 38 times 100 to get that percentage, 8 out of 38 times 100, and then of course this will be 100%. Then in this column, we'll be dividing by 22. And here's our percentages. So a question that could be asked is, of those in gifted classes, are they less, more, or equally likely to take extracurriculars or not? Or I could say, of those in on-level classes, what percent are participate in extracurriculars? Again, it's the way in which we ask the question. So here's the deal, guys. An association exists between two categorical variables if the row or column conditional relative frequencies are different for the rows or columns of the table. Now, the bigger the difference between the percentages, the stronger the association. If there's nearly if the percentages are pretty much equal or the same, even if it's like, not just exactly 50-50, but even like 55, 45, that's pretty close that there's not much of an association. But if you have a big gap, such as 70% or 30%, then you can say, yes, there is an association. So the bigger the gap, the stronger the association. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Which conditional relative frequency table will address the question? In this survey, do more students who are enrolled in gifted classes or more in on-level classes prefer being involved in extracurriculars? So again, do more students who are enrolled in gifted classes? So I'm really looking at those in gifted classes. So this would be this table right here. So this is what I would use to answer the questions. Those that are in gifted classes, almost 80% participate in extracurriculars than those that do not participate. So if you are in a gifted class, I can pretty much predict that you're going to participate in extracurriculars. There is a big gap between these two. Now, if you're in on level, can I predict that you're going to participate in extracurriculars or not? There's not really a big gap between these two percentages. So I really can't say there is an association being an on level. But I can with the gifted folks that are in gifted classes. According to this survey, 80% of those participate in extracurriculars. So I can say there is an association. The column conditional relative frequency needs to be applied in this situation. The listings of gifted and on-level are column headings, and these categories need to be examined separately to answer the question. By choosing a column method, the gifted and on-level groups are being compared, and that's what we were just talking about. So I am comparing gifted and on-level. We can make a prediction with the gifted, but we could not with the on-level. In this example, we are looking at the row conditional. And again, our question this time could be, of those folks that participate in extracurricular, are they more, less, or equally likely to be in a gifted class or an on-level class? And we can see that there is a big difference between 75% and 25%. So folks that participate in extracurriculars, I can predict that they probably will be in a gifted class. Let's look at no extracurriculars. Of those folks that are not participating in extracurriculars, can I predict if they're going to be in a gifted class or an on level? Well, 40%, 60% may not be big enough gap to say that there's a strong association, but there is with the one for extracurricular activities.